All right, well, welcome everybody. I'm glad that you could join me for my PowerPivot 101 session. Originally, Brad Shack, one of my coworkers, was supposed to do this session, but he had some work issues come up that took a priority over this, so I'm covering for him and doing this session. So I hope that you enjoy it, and I hope you hopefully learn a little bit of something about PowerPivot. I'm glad most people voted in the poll that they were a beginner or had no experience with PowerPivot. If you're an expert, you're probably going to be very bored in this session. But we're going to cover just a basic introduction to PowerPivot and some of the cases where you might use this. So let's jump right in. I've got about 875 slides to go through, so we're going to have to move pretty quickly. I'm just kidding. Not very many slides to go through, but I'll tell you a little bit about me. My name is Dustin Ryan. I'm from Jacksonville, Florida, and I work here at the headquarters at Pragmatic Works, and I'm a business intelligence consultant. I've been working with PW for over 4 years now, basically implementing enterprise data warehouse solutions and building cubes and reports and occasionally unclogging toilets, occasionally clogging too, but mostly unclogging. I'm also a frequent tech editor and contributor on SQL Server books. So if you've read the Knight's 24-Hour Trainer, I worked on that one. The SSAS Pro book that just came out for 2012 also was a contributor for that book, so check those out. And you can also find me speaking at SQL Server events like this one, like this webinar. Got some recorded webinars on pragmaticworks.com that you can find there. I speak at SQL Saturday events. I've got one coming up in Tampa Bay. It's a SQL Server 186, I believe, and it's just all BI stuff, so I'll be speaking there on SSIS 2012. I've spoken at Code Camps before. I spoke at SQL Rally in Dallas this year too, which was awesome. So you can find me speaking at those events. If you want to get in touch with me, you can find me on Twitter at SQLDusty. That's probably the best way. You can send me a question on there, or you can even reach me at my blogs on bidn.com, my other blog, sqldusty.wordpress.com. If you're not familiar with bidn.com, that's Business Intelligence Development Network. It's kind of like SQL Server Central for business intelligence, so I definitely encourage you to check that out. There's forums on there to ask questions. You can blog on there as well. There's lots of great technical articles. There's even job postings on there, and then there's information about SQL Server events in your area. So check that out. That's a great site. Great site. Okay, so let's jump into PowerPivot 101. So just to go over a high-level overview of what we're going to be covering, we're going to be talking about how we can load data into PowerPivot, how we can bring the data from our sources and load it into our PowerPivot document so that we can work with it. Then we're going to talk about how we can take that data and basically design reports from our PowerPivot workbook. And then we're also going to cover how we can enhance our report with additional data. So maybe we've created a PowerPivot workbook that has data from SQL Server, and we want to bring in some data in the case of our example, we're going to actually bring in some data from SQL Server, and then we're going to relate that to some data that's basically in a spreadsheet. So we're going to talk about that. And then at the end, hopefully we'll have time, but we're going to talk about how we can publish the data and basically share that data with SharePoint. And for those of you just joining, we're going over PowerPivot 101. Try and hold the questions until the end because there's quite a bit of people in this webinar. So if you hold your questions to the end, and then Melissa will help me knock them out one by one. Okay. All right. So why data warehouse? Well, one of the main reasons that people usually build a data warehouse is for optimized reporting. So, well, before we jump into this, one of the reasons that we're talking about data warehouse is because PowerPivot is kind of designed to overcome some of the typical hurdles with building a data warehouse. So, if you've taken on a data warehouse project before, chances are there were quite a few road bumps along the way with designing that data warehouse. A lot of times, what I've seen in my experience is the client will take on too much to chew on. The scope is too large, and it becomes too much of a headache, and there's a lot of failure along the way. And so PowerPivot is designed to accomplish a lot of the same things a data warehouse project is designed to accomplish, but without a lot of the same roadblocks. So with a data warehouse, we want optimized reporting, right? So if you've got an HR manager and he's trying to report on his HR data, he's probably got data all over the place. He's probably got data in spreadsheets. He's probably got some data in a database somewhere, maybe a list of employees who are with the company. So basically, a data warehouse is designed to kind of bring all those data sources together into one format that we can optimally report on. Also, a data warehouse is designed for archival of the data. So if you work in the mortgage industry, you know that you've got to hang on to your mortgage data for 7 years. Well, and the data warehouse is designed to do that. We're designed to hold on to that data for as long as necessary so that we can do all kinds of really neat historical analytics over time and compare data from 7 years back to data today and see how we're growing and how things are changing. And then lastly, kind of already mentioned this consolidation of data. Data warehouse is designed to bring those multiple data sources together. So if you've ever built a cube before, you probably built it on top of a denormalized data warehouse, and so you could have been bringing together some data from Oracle, and maybe you've brought some data together from SQL Server, and you kind of brought those in together. You consolidated them into that one data warehouse, and then built a cube on top of that. Well, that's kind of what we're going to do with PowerPivot. So PowerPivot is designed to really promote a self-service BI environment. So if I've got any report writers out there in the audience, you probably have a humongous backlog of reports to write. Well, PowerPivot is designed to kind of help alleviate that, because with PowerPivot, PowerPivot is really designed with the end user in mind. So it's designed for that end user out there that if he's an end user like the end users I've dealt with, he's probably dumb as rocks. So you ask all these ridiculous questions, and sorry if I offend any end users out there. I'm just generalizing here. So he probably isn't very technical, but maybe thinks that he is, and so it creates a lot of problem for IT. But with PowerPivot, we're really putting the ability to create those reports, and we're putting the IT in their hands, because most end users, in my experience, are very savvy when it comes to Excel, and they can run circles around me with some of the stuff that they do in Excel. And so PowerPivot is a whole lot like Excel, and it's very simple as far as building the kind of reports that you can do in PowerPivot. And so when we go through the demos that we're about to go through in a few minutes, try and think of this as from the perspective of an end user. Think about how simple this would be for an end user, how little coding language you have to know, how little you have to know about SQL Server in general. And PowerPivot is what's going to happen with PowerPivot. It's going to create a cube for you without the data warehouse. So when we build our PowerPivot workbook, we're going to bring in data from multiple data sources, and it's going to bring in that data from a spreadsheet. We're going to bring it in from SQL Server, and we do not necessarily have to have a data warehouse. So in the case of the example we're going to go through, I'm going to be bringing in some data that is in a data warehouse, but that's not necessary. And we're going to take that data from the multiple sources, and we're going to be able to match it together, even data that's loosely related. So in our example, I've got some really neat temperature data. I've got average temperatures from various sales regions that is loosely related to the AdventureWorks data. So we're going to be able to bring in that temperature data, and we're going to be able to bring in that data from the AdventureWorks data warehouse, and we're going to be able to relate them together so that we can create some really neat reports that otherwise we wouldn't be able to create. So even though the data is loosely related and it may not be related at all, naturally we can create those relationships in PowerPivot and bring that stuff together. So it's really cool. So the end goal is basically to develop this multi-dimensional database, which PowerPivot is going to do behind the scenes, without having to build a data warehouse, without having to build a cube. All right, so what will you need to make this work? So the really cool part about PowerPivot is if you have Excel already, you already have the tools that you need to do this. So if you're following along, all you need to have is Excel 2010 or Excel 2013. If you've got Excel 2007, you're going to need to upgrade to 2010. But most businesses that I've worked with usually stay up to date with the Office components. So if you've got Excel 2010, you're going to need to download the PowerPivot free plugin from Microsoft, which you just go out there and Google it and you can find it, or go to powerpivot.com and you can download the free plugin for that. Or if you're in Excel 2013, you're going to need to activate the plugin from within Excel. In our case, I've got a virtual machine that's running with Excel 2010, so everything's going to be 2010. But it is the Denali release of Excel, so there's a few enhancements to the Denali release of PowerPivot that we'll see, and I'll try to remember to point those out as we go along. All right. So one other note. So we only need Excel to make this work, but if we're going to share these PowerPivot workbooks on SharePoint, we'll also need analysis services running and then SharePoint, and when we get to that point, I'll cover those pieces. All right, so demo, so let's go ahead and jump right into the demo. All right, so I've got this virtual machine running here, and it's running on SQL Server 2012. Got Office 2010 components installed, and so let me open up my Excel spreadsheet here, and I've basically got this empty Excel spreadsheet here, except for I've got my temp data here that I downloaded off the internet. So if I want to create a PowerPivot workbook, after installing the PowerPivot components, I need to go to this PowerPivot tab here, and you'll see that I've got my PowerPivot window button here. Let me fire up Zoom it real quick so that way I can do my zooming. All right, cool. All right, so I'm going to fire up PowerPivot, click the PowerPivot window here, just give this a second to warm up. Okay, so the first thing I want to point out here in the PowerPivot Designer is okay, let's see. Up here I've got, this is where I'm going to specify what kind of data I want to bring into my PowerPivot workbook. And also here, so if I click from database, you can see I've got a few options here. I've got SQL Server, I've got the most popular database tool in the world, Access, or I could bring in data from analysis services. But one of the really neat things about PowerPivot is just the wide range of data sources that you can use as a source for your PowerPivot workbook. So if I look here, I can see all these different database technologies that I could bring data in. I've got Teradata, I've got Oracle, IBM. I could even bring in data from SQL Server Reporting Services report, which is pretty cool. I could bring in data from an Excel file, text file, from an analysis services cube. So basically anything that you can get to with an OLEDB connection or an ODBC connection, you can bring in to PowerPivot workbook. So it's extremely flexible with the kinds of data that you can bring in. So because of that, you can do some really cool stuff. But in this case, I'm just going to select good old-fashioned SQL Server, and I'm going to click Next. And I'm going to specify what server it is. In this case, SQL Server is running on my local machine, so I'm just going to select localhost. And for my database, I'm going to select AdventureWorks DW. SQL Server's running. There it is. Okay. So I'm going to click Next. So now think of this, like I said before, we want to think of this from the perspective of an end user. So an end user probably does not know T-SQL. There's plenty of end users out there who do know T-SQL, but an end user probably does not know T-SQL, so they're probably not going to check this box here to write a query that will specify the data to import. So, but if it's an IT person developing this that does know T-SQL, you could check this option and click Next to go in and actually write your T-SQL query. But in our case, we're going to pretend like we're a dumb as rocks end user, and we're going to select from a list of tables. Okay, so you can see I've got a list of all the tables here that are in our database. I'm going to select Fact Internet Sales, and then I'm going to click this little button here that says Select Related Tables. And what this is going to do is it's going to use the referential integrity of the database. It's going to look at the relationships that exist between those tables, and it's going to determine which tables are related to this fact table in our data warehouse. And so you can see that it says 6 related tables were selected. I've got sales territory, promotion, product, currency, customer. One thing to point out, so say like I want to get product category and subcategory, and I come here to product and product. And I say, oh, I want to get the related tables because I want to get product category and product subcategory. So I click Select Related Tables, and you can see that 11 related tables were selected. That's because it selected any table that was related to the product. So if this is too many tables, if this is more tables than you actually want to bring into your PowerPivot workbook, there's no way to undo this. So we'll need to select all here and then kind of start over from scratch. So just figure I'd point that out to you before anybody gets themselves in trouble. All right. So if I want to select product category and product subcategory, I'll come in and select those. And then I also want to make sure that I get the geography here too. Okay. Also want to point out that we can filter our data here too. So if I go back to Fact Internet Sales and I go to Preview Filter, I can filter my data. I can filter my data here in the table import wizard and really specify, well, what kind of records do I want to bring into here. So like if I click here on my ship data key, I could say, okay, maybe I don't want these. I could individually select items here, or I could do a number filter. So maybe I could say greater than, maybe I only want 2007 up, so greater than 2007-0101. So that way I can filter what data is going to be brought into our PowerPivot workbook. But in that case, I'm just going to leave that here. And you can see that I've got, it's kind of brought into a spreadsheet-like format, all the columns that were in our table. So maybe, we don't care about, let's see, discount amount. So I can uncheck that. We don't want to bring that column in. Maybe I want to check that, and maybe I don't want to bring these columns in. So you can uncheck and specify which columns you want brought into your PowerPivot workbook. This is something that you should do. In our case, we're not going to step through that process because it'll take a few minutes. But this is something that you should do because this is really about if you're an IT person developing this and not just some end user developing it for yourself. If you're an IT person developing this, you only want to present to the end user the columns that are necessary for them to accomplish what they need to accomplish. We don't want to give them too much to digest. Okay, so I'm going to select OK. And I think I've got all of the tables here that I need. Currency, geography, okay, yep, I've got all those, and I'm going to click Finish. And so what's happening now is PowerPivot is importing all of these data from these tables. So you can see that it's selecting all the rows. We've got all these rows being successfully brought over. Okay, almost there. All right, and then I can see a summary, a detailed summary of what just happened. So that's good, and I'm going to click Close. Okay, so you can see down here in our PowerPivot viewer workbook, we can see that we've got all of these tables are brought in as individual sheets here. Okay, so the first thing that I want to show you from here is that we've got all of our measures here, and in case you're not an IT person or you're not familiar with data warehousing, a measure is basically a quantitative way that we measure success in our business. So you see we've got a field here that says sales amount. That would be a measure in our cube or our data warehouse. So that's how we can measure success, the amount of sales we have, or product cost, or so we've got standard costs here. So these are what we're going to refer to as measures. So if you hear me say measure, I'm talking about a numeric value in our cube, something like cost or sales amount or profit or anything like that. If you hear me say accidentally say something like attribute or dimension, I'm talking about a way that we could describe those measures. So maybe we could describe our sales by product. That would be a dimension. That's what the DIM stands for here, DIM product. If I say attribute, I'm talking about an attribute of this dimension, such as the product name or the color or something to that effect. So if I'm talking about attribute, I'm talking about something like a product color or a product name. If I'm talking about a dimension, I'm talking about a way to describe a measure such as product or geography or date or something like that. So if you hear me say that, that's what I'm referring to. So we've got all these numbers here in our fact table here called Fact Internet Sales. And if I want to create a new measure from that, it's very easy. I'm going to use something called DAX. It's a data expression language. And it's going to translate. It looks very much like Excel. So when you see me typing it, you're going to kind of think, oh, that kind of looks like Excel. And in the past, it kind of resembled MDX. So, but don't worry, you don't have to know MDX. How many people here just pooed their pants when I said MDX because you're afraid you're going to have to know MDX? But that's not the case. What's going to happen here is this is going to translate everything that we're about to do here in PowerPivot into MDX for us behind the scenes. So maybe I want to create a new calculated column here. I want to create a profit column. So I want to take my sales amount and I want to subtract the total product cost to come up with a profit value. So to do that, it's very similar like Excel. I'm just going to hit the equal sign to create a new formula. And I'm going to select my sales amount, and I'm going to click the minus button, and I'm going to select product cost. And so I'm taking my sales amount minus my total product cost, and I'm going to hit enter. So let's give it a second. You can see down here it's kind of crunching the numbers. All right, so we've got our profit here, and so let's rename this. So I'm going to right-click on my calculated column here and click Rename Column. Just call this Profit. All right, so great. So you can see how simple that was, and that's really the goal of PowerPivot, is to democratize this kind of technology, make it feel more like Excel, less like MDX, and make this really simple for our end users. So most end users I know could do this. This is a piece of cake for an end user. They know how to write an Excel formula, so they would know exactly what to do when they wanted to create this new column here. All right, so we've got our profit here. Now let's go over to our geography tab here, and we want to do something like we want to figure out where are our customers. How many customers do we have in each geographical region? So in our geography table, we've got all these different cities in California and such, and all over the country and all over the world, really. So I want to figure out, well, where are most of my customers? Well, to do that, we're going to create a new calculated column, and this is going to require a little bit more knowledge of DAX. But what I want you to notice here is just how great the IntelliSense is and how easy it is to write the formula. It'll almost write the formula for you. So if I want to count how many customers we have in our in each geography, I'm going to use the count rows function. So you see how the IntelliSense popped up here for us and said, okay, I see you started typing the word count, so here's all the functions that begin with count. So I'm going to select count rows, and I want to count the rows in a different table. So we need to use our related tables function. So you can see I just started typing related, and it popped up right there with the IntelliSense for me, related table. And I'm looking for the table dim customer because I want to count my customers. Okay, so I'm counting the rows in a related table dim customer. So if I just hit enter now, all right, you can see it did a count for us. So you can see that some geographies don't have any customers in them. You can see I've got 94 in this geographical region, which is La Jolla. And you can see it did all of that for us automatically, just with this simple DAX formula here. All right, so let's go ahead and rename this one too. Right-click on it and click Rename Column. And we'll call this one Customer Account. Oops. Okay. All right, so, but what if I wanted to bring over some other, maybe I wanted to, denormalize this data a little bit more. So if I wanted to go to my customer table here, and so you can see here that I've got this geography key, which is a foreign key relationship to that geography dimension that we were just looking at. But maybe I wanted to denormalize it a little bit more, kind of flatten it out, and I wanted to bring in some of that customer geography data into this part of our PowerPivot workbook. So I can come over here, we're going to start a new formula, and I'm going to type related. So this time, instead of using the related table function, we're going to use the related function. And now I need to specify which column I want to bring over here. So if I just start typing dim geography, you can see that it brought up all of the tables that begin with dim G, in which this case is just the dim geography table. And you can see it's got a list of all the columns here that are also part of this table. So I'm just going to scroll down and find the one that I want. So I want the city attribute in the dim geography dimension. And then just click tab, and then I'll close the parenthesis. And then once I hit enter, it's crunching those numbers. It's going to go over to the dim geography table, and it's going to bring in all of those cities for each customer. And so then I can come in here and rename this. We'll call this customer city. So just I want you to notice just how simple it is to type this DAX. So to be honest with you, I don't really have a whole lot of PowerPivot experience. I don't have a lot of experience building solutions with PowerPivot. Most of my experience is in developing analysis services solutions and integration services and reporting services. But you can see just how simple this is. An end user could very easily do the kind of things that we're doing here just with basically following the IntelliSense hints that pop up. Okay, so one other thing that I want to show you here, which this is new to the Denali release of PowerPivot, is the diagram view. So if I click this diagram view button up here at the top of our PowerPivot window, you can see that I've got this really spiffy diagram of how all these different objects relate to each other. So you can see that the fact table is kind of at the center, and then we've got all these other tables that are spidering off of that. And you see I've got a little bit of snowflaking here where I've got product and product subcategory and product category, and so I can kind of move these items around and make it a little easier to look at if I want to. So we'll bring in, let's see, bring that over here, kind of straighten things out. So this is really easy to kind of manage how your relationships. So if I want to go back to the data view, like where we were looking at the spreadsheet tabs, I can click data view. We'll go back. And if you're not in the Denali release of PowerPivot, you're going to have to manage your relationships here. So if I go to, let me show you that again. So if I'm on the Home button, on the Home tab, I go to the Design tab here and go to Manage Relationships. And you can see here that I've got all of the relationships here laid out for me. So I can see that customer is related to geography using the geography key. And I can even create new relationships here. So if there's one that's maybe not spelled out in the referential integrity of our database, but I need to specify that here, I can create a new one just by doing that. If I want to edit an existing database, I can come in here and do that too. One thing to point out here is that there are no composite keys. So basically it's a one column to one column kind of relationship. So if you've got two tables that relate to each other using a composite key, we're going to have to work around that, which I'm going to show you how to do that in a few minutes. We'll talk about how you can work around that issue with the composite keys not being allowed. Okay. One other thing that I want to point out here too is that before the Denali release of PowerPivot, role-playing dimensions were not allowed. So if you're not familiar what a role-playing dimension is, so we might have a single table that would join to another table using different keys, and it would play a different role depending on the key. So an example we have here is of a role-playing dimension is dim date. Oops. So don't look at that one. So we've got dim date is joined to the fact internet sales table 3 times on the order date key, the due date key, and the ship date key. So this is what dim date is playing different roles here. So this is what we call a role-playing dimension. And this is very common. You'll probably see this in almost any data warehouse or cube that you work on. Before the Denali release, this wasn't possible. But since the Denali release, it is possible, and it's natively supported. So that's a new feature here, in case you're wondering. So I'm going to close this now. Okay, so now that we've brought all of our data in, and we've created our PowerPivot workbook, now we're going to actually create a report. So let's go back to our Home button. So if I want to create a report from this PowerPivot document, I'm going to click up here on this pivot table icon, and I'm going to select pivot table. So I'm ready to create this. I'm going to select new worksheet. And so now we're ready to start creating our reports. So I've got this nifty little search box here. So like I said before, continue to think of this as from the perspective of an end user. So an end user probably isn't going to, may not understand that these dimensions are kind of organized this way. These tables are organized, and then within these tables you've got all these fields, and so they may not want to search through all those. So if they want to find something like, let's find product category, and I click enter, and it's going to jump right down. So English product name, so I can kind of hit the left and right buttons to flip through all the different instances of where it found the word product. But we want product category, so let's type that, product category. So dim product category, great. And I want to bring in the English product category, so I can click the little checkbox next to it, and it automatically detected that this is something that we probably want to slice our measures by. We probably want to analyze our measures by the product name, so it put it on the row label there for us. If I want to remove it, I can just click on it and drag it out. Or I can select it up here in the PowerPivot field list and drag it down here into the row labels, and then you see how that automatically splits that out for me. So I see a nice little list of all of the different product categories that we have in this table. Okay, but let's find our subcategory, our subproduct categories. So I can type in subproduct. Oops, did I type it wrong? Subcategory is what it's called, I believe. Okay, there it is. Yep. And I want to bring in my product subcategory, so I'm going to drag this and place this underneath our product category name. And you can see I got this nice little hierarchical view of our categories and our subcategories. So you can see I've got a list of all the subcategories that fall under accessories. One thing I meant to point out, and that you may have noticed here, but it might be hard to notice it with the GoToMeeting and how you might have a delay or something like that. But you may have noticed that this is very, very fast. And one of the reasons for that is that this is all held in memory. So this PowerPivot workbook is all held in memory. So anything that I'm doing here, any click or any action, everything is being done in memory. So I'm able to do things like sort extremely, extremely fast. I'm able to slice and dice this cube extremely, extremely fast because it's all held in memory. So there's no server technology running behind the scenes. I'm running this on this virtual machine I've got now. I've got my laptop's kind of beefy, so I've got 8 gigs of memory allocated to this virtual machine. But I've seen this done on netbooks with 2 gigs of memory, and it performs great. And that's because of just the amount of compression that PowerPivot will use. So you could take, it's almost a 10-to-1 compression in a lot of cases. So I've even seen 98% compression with a PowerPivot. So you can bring in large amounts of data, and it compresses very nicely. One thing I meant to point out that I kind of skipped over is I've got, let me see, I've got this as a completed workbook that was done for a previous lab, but I just want to show you just how fast this sorts. So in Excel, you probably were used to the amount of row limitations. I believe at one point it was 64,000, and then after that it was over 1 million, I believe. But there's none of those limitations with PowerPivot, so we're not going to have any of those problems. So when this opens, I'll show you just how fast it can sort. So like if I come here to my fact table and I say, okay, I want to sort this by my sales order number, and I'm just going to click here. I'm going to select sort A to Z. Now don't blink so you don't miss it. I'm going to click sort A to Z. Boom, done. There was not even a fraction of a delay. So if I come back and I say I want to sort Z to A, done instantly. So done in well under a split second. So you can see just how fast this really is because it's all held in memory. So I mentioned that I've seen this done on a netbook before with 2 gig of memory, so you can do that, but you probably want at least 3 to 4 gig to get optimal performance. And of course, the more data that you're bringing into your PowerPivot workbook, the more memory you'll need. So if you're working on this PowerPivot workbook and you build this wonderful workbook that's bringing in 20 gig of data or whatever it is, and you send this off to somebody who's running on a sad little weak machine, they're probably going to run into some problems. Excuse me. All right, so I just wanted to show you how fast that sorting is and how awesome, basically how awesome it is. Okay, so we've brought in our categories and our subcategories. So let's go down here and find our measures that we created. So here's our fact and our sales. So remember, we created a couple measures. We created our profit. So let's bring that in. Let me see, it's in alphabetical order. There it is. So I'm going to drag that in. So there's profit. So you can see it splits that profit out very nicely across our categories and our subcategories. And then something else that I can do very easily is you can see that it created this profit and it just summed it up by default. But if I wanted to do something like find my average profit per subcategory or category, I could right-click on my measure here, and I could say summarize by. I could select different aggregation methods. So I could select I want to count, min, max, average, or distinct count. So I'm going to select average. And you see that it's going to transform this profit calculation that we built into an average. So I can see that my average profit for accessories is $12.15. See, bike racks and the bike stands are doing pretty well. I make a lot of profit on those. But you can see that I make my most profit on my bike. So bikes are where the money's at. So if I want to bring in another instance of my profit measure, I can just select that here and drag that down. And you see that it's going to add that with the default aggregation of sum. So I can look at my average profit side by side with my with the summation of my profit. Okay, so let's go back to our, oh yeah, one other thing. So if I find my dim date and I go to calendar year, I can right click on my calendar year attribute. So if I want to do some analysis over time, so I want to look at my profit over year to year, I can right click on my calendar year and I can select, let's add this to slicers vertical. Okay, and you can see here that it has created these slicers over here, which from the perspective of an end user, these look like buttons. So these are something that every end user understands. They're going to understand how that they can come in here and select 2005, and you can see that the data automatically filters. So 2005 and 2006, Adventure was just a baby company, but in 2007, things really just blew up, and you see how things changed here. So one thing you'll notice is that 2009 and 2010 are kind of grayed out. So this is indicating to the user that these are filters that we could select but will result in no data. So if I come in here and I select 2009, I'm not going to have any data. So that's why it's grayed out there. It's indicating that there's no data available for those filters. So if I want to come in here and I can select multiple just by clicking on 2005 and dragging, and I can select that way, I can multi-select that way, or I can click on 2005 and hold control and select multiple filters that way too. All right, so let's bring up 2008. Okay, so let's bring in, I want to find my promotion type. Oops, I think let's type in promo. Okay, so there's my promotion dimension. And I want to bring in my promotion type, and I want to bring that in as a slicer too, so I could right click on it and select add slicers vertical, or I could just drag it down here into my slicer vertical here. And I can see that the different promotions that were available in that time frame. So the grayed out ones mean that these are promotions that I don't have any records for in 2008, and the ones that are highlighted are the ones that I do have data associated with. Okay. All right, so moving along, let's go back to our PowerPivot document. So if you had closed this, if you're following along and you accidentally closed this, that's okay. It's still available, so you can see that I closed it, and I can come back up here on the PowerPivot window button, and this is going to open up my PowerPivot document again. So earlier I was talking about how we we're going to bring in some weather data. So here on the spreadsheet here, you can see that I've got this weather data. I've got it broken down by region and by month, and then I've got the average temperature by month in those different regions. So I'm going to select all of this, and I'm going to copy it, and I'm going to go back to my PowerPivot gallery here, and I'm going to select, where is that option? I'm going to select paste here. I'm going to paste to a new table. All right, and so you can see here that it's automatically detected this data that was held in my clipboard. It's brought that in here, and I'm going to call this Temp Data. Not Temp Data, Temp Data. Okay, and I'm going to click OK. And you can see it's crunching that, and it's brought that in as a new sheet in our PowerPivot document. So you can see here I've got regions, and I've got month numbers, and I've got average temperature. So we need to relate this to our sales data somehow. But I don't have any keys here that are going to are going to allow us to create that one column to one column kind of relationship that I was talking about we need earlier. So because we can't create a composite key, we're going to have to relate this to one column in our table. So to do that, we're going to create a concatenation of the two columns together. So if I look at my sales territory table here, I can see that I've got my sales territory region here, which is, that's what we're looking for. I've got Northwest, Northeast, but I also need to bring in my date as well. So I need to get a month, and I need to get my month and a sales territory region to tie this to my temp data. So over here, we're going to create a new column. I'm going to click the equal sign, and we're just going to concatenate these two fields together. So I'm going to select region, and then I'm going to use an ampersand and the month. Oh wait, I'm sorry. We don't need the month. We need the month number. That's what we need. There we go. Okay, so it's concatenating those together. And you see now I have a concatenation of my region and my month number. And we're going to call this, we'll call this Temp Key. So this is our key. This is how we're going to relate it to the rest of our PowerPivot workbook. All right, great. So I've created my key here. And now I'm going to come over to my Fact Internet Sales table, and we're also going to need to create another composite key here that we'll use to relate to our temp data in the temp key. So I'm going to come over here and click in the empty column under Add Column, and I'm going to click the equal sign. And this formula is going to be a little bit more complex because we've got to bring in data from two related tables. So I'm going to type in related, and we want to get the DIM sales territory region column. So I'm going to type in DIM sales territory, okay? So I can find region. I'm going to click enter. All right. Let's see, oops, I think I hit a wrong button. Okay. And then I also need to get I want to concatenate this to the related key of the month number of years. So I'm going to type in related, and I need to go to the DIM date table to get the month number. So DIM date, and I'm looking for the month number of the year. That's the one I need to create this composite key that will relate to our temp data table. So month number a year. All right. So oops, typo again. All right. So I'm going to hit enter. And so this is creating our composite key that's going to allow us to relate this to our temp data table. So I've got basically the same kind of key type there. And I'm going to rename this. And I'm going to purposely rename this something different than what I called it in the temp data table for a reason. And I'm going to show you that in a second. So I'll just call this my temp key. Okay, and we're doing this for a reason. Okay, so if I could, one way I could recreate this relationship here, so it's not just enough that I've brought in this additional data. I need to relate it to the rest of the data in our PowerPivot document. So I could do that by right-clicking here and saying create relationship, and then I could do that. I could specify, okay, you know, this column here needs that one, and this one column, I need to use this column here. But I want to show you something because remember, we're looking at this from the point of an end user. So an end user may not remember that, or they may not know. They're just like, okay, I've got my keys here, and I've got my keys here, and so now I'm going to close this. All right, I'm coming back to our PowerPivot document here, or our pivot table here, and the first thing you'll notice is that I've got a little notification here saying our PowerPivot data has been modified. So I can, it's telling me that there's a change that has occurred to our PowerPivot workbook. I need to refresh this to get those changes. So I'm going to click that. All right. So I scroll all the way down to the bottom. You can see now that I've got my temp data. All right. So I've got temp data here. I want to bring in my average temp. I want to bring in my average temp as a vertical slicer. Okay, so I've got my average temperature down here. Let me move this up a little bit so we can see it a little easier. I'm going to select this, but wait, what the heck's going on? My data's not filtering. Well, that's because we didn't create that relationship between the temp data table and our other tables. And PowerPivot has detected this, and we've got another notification here saying that a relationship may be needed. So it's detected that we're running into some kind of issue here and that a relationship could be needed. So I can click this Create button here in case we missed it the first time around. And it's automatically going to detect those relationships for us. So it's detecting relationships as done. So if I click on Details, it's going to show us the relationship, if any, that detected there. So relationship created. So it automatically detected that there was a relationship between my temp key and the temp key we created in our temp data table. So even though they were named differently, it automatically detected that relationship and created it for us. All right, so I'm going to click Close. So now if I come here and I select these, we're going to see that we've got filtering. So pretty cool. We see that our data is now filtering because that relationship has now been created. Okay, so we've got these average temperatures, but this isn't very pretty to look at because it's got all these ugly looking numbers. Maybe we want to make this a little easier. Maybe we want to be able to have our end user filter by, you know, if the temperature was cold, if it was cool or warm or hot, or which if you live in Florida like me, you get to experience all of those. Although when the temperature gets down to around 60 like it is today, everyone thinks that it's freezing here. But now I want to go back to my PowerPivot window because we're going to create those different temperature categories. I'm going to go to my temp data field, and we're going to create a new formula here. That's basically going to say if the average temperature is less than 40, we're going to call it cold. Okay. If the average temperature is less than 55. We'll call it cool. You see it, this is just a very basic if statement that if you're used to Excel, you've probably written hundreds of these. So this is something that most end users could pick up. So if the temperature is less than 70, we're going to call it warm. Otherwise, it's going to be hot. All right, make sure I get that right numbers of parentheses. Okay, so I'm going to click Enter. All right, so you can see cold, cold, warm, hot. All right, looks like it's working. I'm going to rename this, and we'll call this temp category. All right, cool. All right, so let's close this. All right, let's get rid of the average temperature, get rid of this out of our vertical slicers. All right, and you'll notice that when I drug that out and it refreshed my pivot table, it automatically refreshed our PowerPivot field list. So now I get to see the temp category here listed under my temp data table. Drag that in. And so now I've got these nice nifty little temperature category buttons, cold, cool, hot. And so now I can do all kinds of really neat analysis to figure out, okay, so what kind of sales are we doing when it's cold, when it's cool, or if it's hot or warm? Are we selling more bikes when it's cool outside, or are we selling more bikes when it's warm outside? So it's very cool. All right, one other thing I want to show you is how we can create new measures inside of our pivot table. So to do that, let's see. All right, where is that? Let's see, options, PowerPivot. There it is. That's where I'm looking for, a new measure. So if I want to create a new measure in this pivot table, I can come up here and click this new measure button. And so a rule I want to point out for you is that when you're creating your new measures, you want to select which table is acting as your measure group. So in this case, it's fact internet sales. And I'll call this daily orders. All right, so we want to get a count of how many orders are we getting a day. And so down here, I'm just going to write basically an Excel formula. So I'm going to sum up. I want to get my order quantity. And I want to divide that by, I needed to get a distinct count of how many days did I have orders. So I'm going to count rows. And I'm going to use the distinct function here to get a distinct count of the days. And I want to get all of my order days, and I have my order date key is in my fact internet sales table, so I can get it from there. So fact internet sales, okay. So let's find our order date key. All right, there it is. All right. So I'm basically just written this very simple formula. I'm summing up my order quantity, and I'm dividing it by the distinct count of order dates. Okay, and I'm going to select what kind of category formatting should I use here. This is a number, so I'm going to select number here, and I'm going to click OK. All right, you can see that it automatically added that that new measure for us, the daily orders, and that daily orders measure is going to be available here underneath fact internet sales. So you can see here at fact internet sales, got my daily orders here, and I've got this little calculator icon here indicating that this is a calculated measure that we've created inside of our pivot table. Okay, so there were a couple other things I want to show you, but we're kind of running out of time. So I'm going to jump ahead to the part where we share this on SharePoint. So we're going to kind of move quickly, so hang on to your britches. So I built this really cool PowerPivot document, and I've got this pivot table report, and the end users are really excited to look at it. So I could save this out on a network share and just have my end users download it from there, or I could email it to them. But if you'll notice, let's see, let me make sure I save this. Save this real quick. So this is taking a second. Uh-oh. Please don't crash on me. Okay, cool. All right. Actually, I want to save this on, make sure I save this on my desktop. All right. And we'll call this PowerPivot Demo Temp Data. Cool. Save that. All right. Come on, buddy. Should be done. All right, there it is. So I'm going to minimize this. All right, here's that save document. So I'm going to show you. You can see that it's over 7 meg. So we could email this, but that's still a pretty big email. So probably the best way to share this would be through SharePoint. So if I come up here to my open my workbook back up in Excel, and I click Save and Send, you see I've got this option here, Save to SharePoint. So I can save this to a PowerPivot gallery. So I'm going to select my PowerPivot gallery here. I'm going to click Save As. And we'll keep the name PowerPivot Demo Temp Data, and I'm going to click Save. And so I've also got this option here that's checked, says Open with Excel in the browser. So once we're done uploading this to SharePoint, it's going to open this up in the browser for us. We'll be able to see how it looks in SharePoint. So I'm saving this. So while it's doing this, I just was going to point out, now remember when we were talking about what you need to make this work, you only need Excel. So as long as you're running this on your local machine, which could be a good thing or a bad thing, you've got everything you need to work for this to work as long as you've got Excel. So if you've got Excel, you can make this work. But if you want to save this up to SharePoint, once you move this document up to SharePoint, then it's using the analysis services resources behind the scenes. So which I'll point out to you in a second. So now we've got this document open in our SharePoint site. Now end users who can connect to our SharePoint and have access to this document can now come in here, and it's just like they're looking at it in Excel, and come in here and click the filters. And you notice that I clicked 2009, and this hourglass has happened. I said, well, what the heck happened? Before, when we were looking at this in our in Excel, this thing was lightning fast. But now that I've clicked this filter, it's all of a sudden it started chugging along. Well, what's happening? Well, what's happening is that because this is now out in SharePoint, it's basically building a cube for us behind the scenes and storing that. So once this builds the cube for us behind the scenes, it's now going to be very, very quick. So if I click my filter here, you can see now that it's back to being its usual lightning fast self. So if I come here to if I open up Management Studio and I connect to my PowerPivot instance of analysis services, if I refresh this here, you can see here now that I've got this new database created. It says PowerPivot Demo Temp Report Sandbox. Actually, I'm sorry, it's this one. This is Demo Temp Data. That's what I call it, Demo Temp Data. So you can see that it's created this database on the fly for us. And so now all the queries that are being generated by this spreadsheet are now being fired up against this database here. So you can see the different connections here and that are part of this workbook, and the different tables that are brought in this workbook. So it's very cool. So any queries now that are being run against this are being fired up against that database. And so all of the server resources are now being used by this PowerPivot workbook, as opposed to when it was on your local machine being used by your local resources. So one thing I haven't pointed out yet is refreshing the data. So I forgot to mention, when we were bringing in the data, when we were importing it in from SQL Server and importing it in from that spreadsheet, as soon as we bring that in, that data starts becoming stale. So we've loaded all of this data from our SQL Server tables and whatever other data sources we're bringing in. Now the data is stale. The data is becoming old, and those changes are not being reflected in our PowerPivot workbook. So if we're just working locally, I can come in here to my workbook, and I can click, I want to refresh this, and do that, and it'll do the refresh for me here. But if this thing is out on the server, we want to make sure that we set this up to refresh automatically. So if I go back out here to here, and I'm going to click on PowerPivot Gallery. I'm going to go to my PowerPivot Gallery here. All right, and we'll see any PowerPivot documents that are part of this gallery. So here's the one I just uploaded, PowerPivot Demo Temp Data. And I can schedule this by clicking this little calendar icon. It says Manage Data Refresh. And now I can create a schedule for this to automatically update our PowerPivot workbook. So I can enable a schedule and say I want to update this daily. I want to update it every weekday. And I want to do it, in the middle of the night at 12 a.m. when the database isn't really being used by anybody. And so once I set that up, this scheduling will then automatically update this PowerPivot workbook for us. And now anyone who is using this PowerPivot workbook up on SharePoint will then see brand new data. The data will all be refreshed, and good to go. So I hope that wasn't too fast. I know we kind of flew through that. It's about 12 o'clock, and I've left about 4 or 5 minutes at the end. So if there's any questions, we can start knocking out those questions, Melissa. But I hope everybody enjoyed this demo, and I hope learned a little bit about creating PowerPivot reports and PowerPivot workbooks. And so, like Melissa mentioned earlier, this recording is going to be available on pragmaticworks.com. So in case you had to step away for something work-related, make sure you check that out. You can check out that recording later. And there's also tons of other great recordings out on pragmaticworks.com from all of the other free webinars done by our different speakers. So thanks, everybody, for having me. Thanks for attending my webinar. And look forward to speaking to you guys at some point in the future.